I hit lectures right after lunch. Anybody who falls asleep, hit them. If I fall asleep, throw something. I'm David Kunitz. I was Thrasher originally, Ozone, voice General Hawk, talking Action Sailor when it was reintroduced. Not the first one. Almost that old, but not quite. Anyway, that's who I am. I'm just going to show you a couple of spots because this is about vehicle designers and decided it's all about me. We got to play a lot in G.I. Joe, and we'd go on all sorts of adventures. I got to drive that. That's a picture of me in a bridge layer. I got to drive that. That was a lot of fun, and that was my original office. And if you look close on the desk in front of me, that was building the, probably late at night, one night, a picture taken when we were building the space shuttle. But that's each designer's office is a little bit different. Mine was usually a little bit messier, or a lot messier. But yeah, everything was built by hand. So we're going to talk a little bit about vehicles, what they were, how they came about, some of the origins, and again, every little piece of every vehicle at that time was physically built by hand by the designer. So you guys that do modifying, yeah, that's what we did, from scratch. Some of my history in G.I. Joe or at Hasbro shows up there. Got to rub elbows with some folks. And we would always start with drawings. Sometimes detailed, sometimes not, depending on who was going to build the model and how. I'm going to show you a lot of stuff that's was never produced, just because I think it's a little bit interesting. And then some stuff that was produced and how it ended up being the way that it was. So this is a vehicle. It was going to be an inexpensive vehicle. It was going to have 2 wheels, which is different from anything else that we had done. And that's the kind of detailing that we would try to put into some of the first initial drawings, just to show our engineers what things were going to be like, and our this was probably after first sketches, and quite often Greg Burnson would say, hey, do 50 sketches, and we're going to narrow it down from there for each vehicle. That was in the beginning. We slowed down doing 50s because we started getting really, really busy, but that's what it would be. Do 50 sketches, knock it down to, like 3, do another 10 off those 3, and knock it down to the final one. Then we'd make the models and everything else. Didn't always go that way, but that's the way he liked it to work. This was called the Scrambler. It too never got produced. It did end up being a model. There were some things based on an X-wing, so it actually had 2 wings. On the left, it's actually showing wing direction, how they would be, but it would be similar wings, top and bottom, and then a spinning blade in the center, so it could take off. So here's just some more sketches of how things were going to go together and how we were going to make them. I'm going to tell you a story. I covered this a little bit in an earlier panel on how the space shuttle all came about. It started out as the Phi-Star space shuttle, and it was based on the shuttle concepts that were at the Air and Space Museum. We had visited the Air and Space Museum as part of one of our trips down to the Association U.S. Army show, big Army show. And on the upper right corner of that concept drawings, that was actually from Air and Space Museum. It showed a shuttle that was housed in a booster pack. And the vehicle that you see on the left that I drew, those tubes were actually going to tilt out so you could nest that vehicle right in there. And then also it would articulate to become a whole space station. Ended up being a whole complex. That's because Steve Reese liked this drawing and went home and created the whole complex around it. So he did an amazing job making this huge complex system. And then we had to pull it back from what he wanted to do, because he had vehicles that pulled off of it, and all sorts of great stuff that was intended to be on the inside of it. But we pulled it back a little bit. It still was pretty massive, and pretty proud of it. It was a lot of work. This is a different version of the Phi-Star that I had worked on, it broke into two parts. It too was going to be like this mini space station and mini vehicle. Didn't get very far. This was just an early costing model. Did a couple of drawings more on it, but that was just, I just wanted to throw that in as a different kind of 5-star that could have happened. Oh, the reason it was 5-star, I was in the fraternity, Pi Kappa Tau, star was our little logo, 5-star was a song, that's how it ended up. I couldn't get it on the package though. It was, sometimes you got your name in there, sometimes you didn't, or what you were calling it initially. Locust, I've told the Locust story before. The Locust, it was a small vehicle, and I was asked to make this inexpensive vehicle, and it was in a rush. We had to do it really quick because we had this presentation, and I had to go in front of management and get something there. And the whole time we're saying, I'm assuming, has anybody not heard this story? I was told to say it again. All right, people haven't heard the story. All right, anyway, I was told to, that we really need an inexpensive vehicle, and it should be flying. So I wanted to do a mini helicopter. And I did this drawing, and the rule was you always had to put your logo, whether it was Cobra or Joe, on your rendering that you brought in front of management, and you had to put the name of the vehicle. And I broke the rule. I didn't have the name of the vehicle on at the time. And I ran in, the paint, the little dots of white were still wet from paint. I had just finished this drawing, and I ran in and to present it. And I stood up in front of management, and I get sort of a scowl as I'm showing it. They seem to be nodding like it's gonna be okay-ish. And they say, okay, but what's its name? And I said, well, it's the low-cost, it's the Locust vehicle. Can you imagine the swarm of Locust vehicles coming across? You know, kids will be buying multiples of these because they're inexpensive, and it's the Locusts that are coming across. And they go, oh yeah, the Locust, perfect. This is just what it, oh my God. So save that one. And it stuck, and I just couldn't believe it. But yeah, that was kind of fun, and I didn't lose my job, so that was good. But that's where the Locust came from. I actually, whoa, right here is actually how we built models. Is quite often what we do is create a basic shape. And then we pull a vacuum form over it, which means we suck plastic down over these shapes, and then we'd work from that. This is a later suck from earlier molds for the Locust. It was based on what actually came out. And I had some of the old molds, so I just pulled a couple of prints from this. And I may be giving these away later for those. I'll ask a couple of questions, see what happens. See if anybody knows answers. Pay attention. Here we go. I've been talking to a bunch of people throughout the show and telling them little Easter eggs as well, and we'll see if anybody's in the audience that knows those or remembered those, see if it was important to them. So let's just talk about the Despoiler just for a second here. This vehicle came out, it was for Destro, of course. Originally it looked like that. So I had some marketing direction on this one. I was told, we want a really inexpensive small vehicle, just don't make it another flying vehicle. So I made it a walker. It had little wheels in it so you could like break that down and so it could scoot along. So that's what I had done, and I was pretty excited by that, thought it was pretty cool, and I actually started building it when the marketing direction changed a little bit, and they said, well, we don't want it to be a walker because it doesn't go fast enough. I got the little wheels, it'll go. They're like, no, it doesn't go fast enough. I go, all right, so what direction? You want to, recreate something else and, put big wheels on it, get that thing scooting along? They go, well, how about wings? I go, doesn't that make it flying? I have written right here, no flying vehicles, what's up? And they go, well, they're small wings, it'd be more like hovering. Okay, I'm in. I had already started the model, so I just stuck wings on the side of it, and I was pretty pleased with the way it came out. But yeah, that was an interesting way of going. You might have seen this in was it declassified area, but this was a model not too many people get to see. We just gotten first shots. Right after that, we wanted to see how the mechanism was working inside. And the best way to do that is, of course, seeing it in clear. So we probably created like 4 of these, and to test to see if the submarine would go up and down, how it worked, what was working, what wasn't. But it was rare that we would make these, and we usually made very few. But these were a lot of fun to have, just because you got to see everything inside. And it was like the Invisible Man that I used to have as a kid when I was making model kits. But I just wanted to show that off a little bit. Oh, let's talk about computers. So the design department did not have a computer for a number of years, like a lot. And I actually wrote the first proposal to get a computer in the design department, specifically for labels. We had been doing rub-down labels, letter set. Some of you may know that, probably not, but you basically have to scratch labels to get decent lettering, or you hand drew them, and later on somebody would, through photography processes, creating these, cutting out, rubelith and all those things that you won't know about, to create the labels. So that label on the back that has a little star in the United States on it, little zigzag thing, that's actually how a lot of the labels looked when we put them on the vehicles first when we were showing them off, because we didn't have a computer. It was pretty insane. So we did this, I wrote this proposal. My boss's boss said, we don't need computers. They're just gonna slow you down probably. So I had already bought a computer at home because I wasn't gonna fall behind of all my other design friends. And I said, all right, let's do a test. And so we did a label sheet, and it was actually pretty surprising. The computer was faster and better to create letters and shapes and decoration. So we ended up getting one computer for the whole design department. And I mean, people were there nights, weekends when the air conditioning was off, they were in there trying to use it so they could get time on it. And that lasted for a while. We ended up getting more because apparently they're helpful. So yeah, that 220 you see on it was actually a rub-down label, and then the United States on the back was my chicken scratch trying to say, this is what I'm going to want to the graphic designer who's going to have to go out and do it. But that's what they look like. I just wanted to show you a nice blueprint and tell you a little bit about the Ice Saber and the Mud Buster. We were trying to save money on this one, or save tooling money on this one. So what we did is I created the parts that were going to go on both vehicles. So this is a Tom Hamilton drawing, and he had to use all the parts that I decided that he had to use in his drawing, which he did a great job. But you'll notice that all the missiles, the roll cage is the same for both, and some other small parts. But all it was intended to do is save money in tooling and trying to get the price better for the consumer. Mamba. So this drawing was the first version of the Mamba. Again, Aerospace Museum in Washington. We'd go pretty much every year when we went to the AUSA show, and they had a model of a German helicopter that had intermeshing blades. And I thought it was pretty cool that you have these blades side-mounted. It worked. Russians had one later. I don't think the US ever created one like this, because actually it's really, really dangerous because they're tilted down and they cut people's heads off. So you can go from the front towards these vehicles, but you can never go from the sides. Yeah, it's not good design, unless you're Cobra, because it just doesn't matter, there's more. Yeah, so this was the first design. I wanted it to be, really angular and all. Didn't love it, and people that saw it didn't love it, apparently, so I ended up doing a different drawing. And this is closer to what the real thing, this was the drawing that came out, and I basically based my model making on this one and then changed it so the figures would actually fit. But this is the second drawing, the version 2. Let's talk about the bug. Thank you, thank you. The way the bug came out is not my favorite vehicle. This is initially what the bug was. It was going to be, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it was probably like a $6.99 vehicle. It was really small. It was a one-man legged vehicle that had some guns on it and some stuff. And you can see it has one bubble. And so this was an early rendition of what it would be like. And then I was told, well, we kind of filled up our $6.99 price point. And we like this thing, but let's make it a little bit more expensive. So, somewhere around $9. So we decided, let's make it a little bigger. It's going to have 2 bubbles. It's still going to have the feet. It's still going to roll the feet. We're going to tilt back, and it was going to be all this cool mechanism that made the tilt back because I could afford it. So it was 2 guys, 2 bubbles, a little bit more gun weapons, and yeah, well, that's cool and all, but I think we don't need $9.99 now. Somewhere around $29.99. What do you think? But we like this vehicle. Don't change it. Just make it a little bigger, and well, you got to put more features in it. You got to put more play value on it. And I was told to keep the essence of it. So that's really how the bug ended up being the bug. So I ended up doing, well, I took the wooden model that I had made for the first one, took the wooden model that I made for the second one, and just keep revising until it was like this Frankenstein thing. It was fun to do, and all that. It just felt like Frankenstein to me. It wasn't exactly what I had intended in the beginning. So that's what the wooden model, the costing model, to see what the size would be, and everybody's going, yeah, that's the thing. Great, right, let's go forward with it. And that's how it came out. Thank you. Thanks. My wife's in the audience. Can you earmuffs? Yeah, put your hands up here. No, the bug actually got its name from a girl that I had a crush on at one time. We used to call her Bug. I know. My extension actually was 3754. That was on the one side, and then telephone number of her brother was on the other side, leaving off one number. I was buddies with her brother, but yeah. Anyway, let's talk Hiss. Get off that before I get in trouble. Return to the Hiss. Yeah, past that point. Return to the Hiss. We've talked in other meetings about drawing in meetings. Designers quite often, in order to pay attention, we try to draw. Or maybe we're not paying attention, who knows. Anyway, so we had not intended to do Hiss 2 at that point, and I just started drawing what I thought should be the Hiss 2. Because I really liked Wayne Luther's original drawings. I really wanted a front opening cab, which was in his first drawings. And I thought the Hiss, because of its importance, should be bigger. So I just started doing sketches in meetings. And these are just a couple of the ones that I did. I wanted cargo nets on the side as part of it, and I wanted a lot of detail. And yeah, so that's how the Hiss started. Ended up with a drawing that seemed to be liked, so we ended up doing the product. I had to drop the cargo nets. But that's what the costing model looked like. So it still had the cargo nets, it had bigger guns on the top, it had fold down front, very similar to the way that the final one ended up. It's kind of funny, I'd drawn a bunch of detail on it, and I actually handed this off to one of our model makers and said, you can't put too much detail on this model. I think he did. He just went wild, and that's why you see so much stuff on that thing. I love the way it came out, but that's what happened is I drew some, but he really enhanced it. And that's what the final model looked like. So he really detailed it a lot. Stellar Stiletto. So again, the sketches that you see there are ones that I was probably doing in some meeting or another. I have several more pages of those, of different kinds of configurations of what the Stellar Stiletto had a price point it had to be at, and I just started playing along with it. Also brought back over that. Off the original models. Now this backform is actually off of the model, the backs that I used to make the model for this. Let's look at what that might look like. So before doing that, we do, again, a costing model. And so it was all done for size to see, first of all, to show people this is what we mean by size. It was also done so as the cost engineers were looking at it, they could see and estimate the plastic weights. And then quite often we put some of the mechanism into it. So this did have the tilting tail, so it could fire upright. Again, stolen from earlier, the idea of lifting off from a tail was stolen from, the Germans. But because it's Cobra, it's okay. And those are the molds, and those are some of the backforms that came off of it. Go. That was the final model prior to being cast. So that's what it looked like. There was only one engine on it because we only needed one because we could, duplicate that in casting. It was much sharper than it should have been because somebody's going to get hurt. But yeah, that was taken off in engineering. And that was first shots. So quite often, well, pretty much every time, we would get models back that were not quite the right colors. Things didn't fit quite right, and we'd have to evaluate them and get them so that they looked and felt right, and everything fit and worked and all that. And that's all of it, sort of the steps. All right, let's talk about Jurassic Park for a while. So our buddies over at Kenner had been working on Jurassic Park, and I needed to do a Jeep for Sergeant Savage. And instead of creating a Jeep myself, I decided to steal from them. Now theirs was much more expensive than I had to play with, so I cost reduced this. But if you look at the details that are on the Jeep, it did come out, didn't it? Yeah, it did come out. I didn't change that much. I made it moldable, so it was a lot less expensive, used our wheels. But yeah, there was a lot of, well, I got from a professor, said, as a designer, if you don't have to design it, don't. Lie, cheat, steal. That was his line, not mine here. If you find things that inspire you, use them. Why not? And that significantly inspired me, so I just took it. And it was our company, so it was okay. So you can see that they are almost identical to the line. Tough to see. Sergeant Savage Rock Crusher. This was a vehicle that was supposed to come out. This is drawing all the mechanism pieces that would make it work. It was going to be a rapid fire plunger launch. Worked really, really well. Never came out. Disappointing, because that was a pretty cool vehicle. Could have been used elsewhere. But yeah, we didn't actually produce it. But that's how if we wanted somebody to know how to what the parts were and how we were going to cost it out, that's what a designer had to do prior to it being engineered. So you sort of had to be the engineer. You had to understand the marketing. You had to understand the sales, who your consumer was, and do some of the initial engineering, plus build models, plus render, sketch. You had to do a lot as a designer in those times. It's changed a little bit in that you have to do a little bit less now because we have experts in the field. So instead of a designer doing their own model making, you now have model makers to do all of that. And quite often it's done 3D, so it's a completely different kind of development process. But this is the early days. Arctic Lion, some of you saw the original over at HasCon if you were there. This is a vehicle that I drew because the direction was we need a snow vehicle really bad. So it came out just like this. We also needed a Destro's vehicle really bad, apparently. So yeah, it was deemed that we needed Destro more than we needed snow, and so I changed the... G.I. Joe had a design language that was a little bit smoother, a little bit nicer, and then of course Cobra had a sort of certain aesthetic and color palette. And Destro had a sort of well, definitely a color palette, but also a certain aesthetic. And so we had to morph that from that last drawing that's smoother and nicer to be more Destro-esque. And so created this and then made sure that the Despoiler was able to fit on it and land so that Destro could really command. The Interceptor. So actually there's an Interceptor on the floor that somebody did in CAD 3D. Really looks cool. It's a little bit bigger than it was in reality, but really, really cool. I was pretty psyched to see that. But this is how the initial drawings for that Interceptor were made. This is how I was looking at it. And that was the aesthetic. That's not what you saw on the floor. This is the costing model, the wooden model that I created with pieces that are ripped off of it. I took this off the internet because I don't have any shots of it. But that's what it looked like. This is what's approved. So we're going forward, we're making the model, we're going pretty far ahead. In fact, we're done. Brought it again in front of management. Mine was changed. It looked too Star Wars, is what we were told. Can you make it more Star Trek? Like, yeah, I'm not sure that's Star Wars. I'm not sure it's Star Trek. Anyway, so this had lights and sounds, and you could hold it in the back and fly it around. Had missile launching. It was pretty cool. Depending on the angle you held it, different kinds of sounds, but it had to change it. So it ended up having a longer, sleeker nose, which was apparently more Star Trek. So that's how it was going to come out. The light-up Gatling gun in the front. Yeah, so that could have happened. Didn't quite. We got to a stage where we were showing it at Toy Fair, and then it was deemed that we were no longer going forward with this part of the line. That was in '94. So, mechanized manimals and manimal hunters. I believe this was part of the manimal hunter line. And we created this, we had a whole bunch of mechanized backpacks that when you hit a button, they would snap around and be helmets and guns and shields and all sorts of stuff that would be worn by the G.I. Joes, or at least by the manimal hunters. This too was killed as it went over to Cincinnati. But the nice thing is they took the direction into Star Wars and they created some of the Star Wars Deluxe off of it. So we still got to see some of the mechanisms that we created carry forward into Star Wars, so that was kind of fun. And we talked in an earlier about some of the models that we were creating. So some of the vehicle designers were told, go off and create things that worked. And so a group of us got to do that and then hand them off to Kurt, and he would make them look good. But this was one of the earlier models. Oh, I should say what he does. His name was CD-ROM, and he had wheels, as you see, on his elbows. He's carrying some. They were on his feet. There's one spun into his head, on the hips, yeah. And basically, any position you put that guy in, he would roll. I mean, he would scoot down the hallway, and he was a lot of fun. This guy had the sink and swim mechanism that was in the Barracuda. So he would dive and then raise up and then dive again. This guy was my absolute favorite. I was told that there was no way that I was going to be able to get a figure at that scale smoking. There are, built into his legs are AAA batteries. It had a little bellows in the back and a little chamber that could create smoke. Hit the bellows in the back and the smoke would come out around his head. So at basically a 4-inch scale, we were having a smoking-headed guy, inspired by one of my favorite comic book characters. Anyway. Sonic guy, this guy had jet sounds, and as you tip it, the jet sounds would change a little bit, so we had an attitude switch in it, so he could take off and then really punch up, but again, in a very small figure, which hadn't been done before, and we were told couldn't happen, we made it happen. This guy had basically a laser pointer coming out of it. It was an LED, focused LED, so he was sort of this laser viper. Dude, I ended. Wow. I went too fast. I should have told more stories and stuff like that. Yeah.
The flip-out Nathan was Sergeant Savage. I have his drawings here.
Sergeant Savage?
Yeah. He was going to go on Sergeant Savage. He was pink. He was popping around. Maybe later.
All right. All right. So I'm gonna. Where are we?
It's got about 20 minutes.
20 minutes. All right. Let's start with a couple questions if we have them. There's a question right over here. You're gonna have to stand up real loud unless we get a mic to you.
Can you be more specific with the Jurassic Park Jeep? Did you have a production sample from a toy store? Were you looking at Kenner drawings?
Sure. Yeah, real specifically is I took a toy off the toy shelf and I repainted it. I glued some stuff together and I milled out, I cut some parts off so it would be much less expensive and made it moldable and yeah, made it inexpensive. And later heard that the Kenner guys were kind of pissed because their thing was, I don't know, like $12 or $15 and I got mine out for like $6.99. I get the numbers wrong, but I know that that's sort of where it ended up. But yeah, we were, you know, we were the experts in making things cheap. We got complaints about, you know, from parents, hey, I gotta build this thing. And you'd say to the parent, okay, you can have the thing basically half the size, or you can build the thing. And they go, oh, we'll build it. It's fine, our kid wants big. So our prices compared to everybody else, they were good. They were real good. And I feel that was part of the success of the line. Is part of it was model kit. A lot of kids liked to do that and label it themselves and all that. They liked our detail that we would put into it. And the detail and all that stuff that we put on it, the intention was, if you can create shades and shadows, you don't have to decorate. It basically gives multiple colors to something. It makes it feel like it's more valuable because it seems like there's more colors. And so we put a lot of detail on it, and that was intentional.
So segueing right from that, one of the things that we know is that quite a bit of the time you would cut up and use other things as detail, like the Easter eggs found in the Defiant complex and things like the back of the snake and the tripwire mines. Here's a question. Did you ever use zip ties, for instance, specifically on the bottom of the Crusader shuttle? As tech detail.
I mean, yeah, the question is, do they use zip ties on the bottom of the Crusader shuttle? No. Actually, there's plastic struts that you can get that have multiple textures. And I know the piece you're talking about. And it was something that I bought. It was a styrene piece that was that had that same thing. But yeah, it looks like a zip tie. It could have been. Just the nylon doesn't stick so well, so styrene is much better. Question over there.
Yeah, all the stuff.
Can you stand up? I can't see you. Oh,
all the stuff that wasn't produced at the end of the line, what hurts the worst for you? That the one thing that you wish wasn't made.
Wow. I got all the ones that didn't come out. I got to do all the fun parts already. I mean, the fun part for me is come up with something, build it, and have it there. So I had fun. Then you go into production, that's less fun. So I didn't have to do the unfun parts, I still got to play. And I was moving on to other things and still designing. A designer, by the way, is basically working on 3 years at one time. I mean, you basically have to cover what's coming in from production and evaluating and writing up documents and redrawing stuff to make sure that everything is looking good, fits right, feels good. That's one of the years you're working on. You're also getting into the year, so that's happening that year. That's going to come out this year. The next year is stuff you're working on also, because you're finishing up your design, you're probably finishing up the model making, you're making evaluations on that, and it hasn't gone into tooling quite yet, but you're doing all the things that are prepping it for tooling. And then also you have to come up with the next year, and that's where you're doing all your sketching, your rendering, your pitching to management, what it's going to be. So you're busy. You're working on 3 years all the time. And if you're not busy enough, and you're not doing a full designer's job. Yeah, I got to do all the fun stuff. I'm not that disappointed that of any of the stuff that didn't come out, because again, I got to do the fun things, and I kept going.
I'll let you one right here.
Okay.
Is there a story to the Rattler?
Do I have a story for the Rattler?
Yes. Like how it's made?
Yeah. Rattler I didn't actually design. That was a combination of Wade Luther and Greg Burnson. I know it was designed on the Warthog, and Greg is a big military buff, and so he definitely wanted to make it as realistic as possible, and yet Cobra-ize it a little bit. So that's sort of how that came about.
Hi. So, as you've already figured out, I like space and shuttles and things. And when I was looking at the interceptor there, I don't know if it was my imagination, but it seemed to me like the board and the starboard side engines was different. And usually, you know, when you look at a spaceship or an aircraft, they're usually bilaterally symmetrical. And I was wondering why it was that way. It just looks a little odd.
Yeah, I actually am not a big fan of symmetry. Leo, look at the bug. I always felt that anything that was Cobra-ish, they didn't care. You know, if it crashed, you know, and they did. As long as I had a good parachute. Symmetry is overrated, I think, you know? And especially if it's Cobra. You can get away with a lot. And I prefer to design Cobra vehicles over Joe vehicles just because you can get away with a lot. It's a lot more fun.
Lots of things are asymmetrical, buildings, prop dresses, but the bug, in the comic it was portrayed as like an underwater vehicle. It was always a, you know, sort of a driving submarine, and then in the actual toy itself it looked like it was more land-based. What was its original intent?
It absolutely was supposed to be underwater, and then amphibious. The first drawings you saw sort of took place underwater. It was more like, you know, Jacques Cousteau. It morphed into a more amphibious. I mean, we always wanted the kids to play on the floor. I mean, they're not going to take they're not going to take much into the bathtubs. That would be taking up a lot of space if we took the bug into the bathtub. But yeah, they're going to play on the floor, and so rolling is good. I wanted walking just because it was different, but it didn't really walk. You'd have to fake it, which, you know, it's okay with me, but some people can't see beyond that. Yeah, so it was supposed to be underwater, and it was supposed to roll underwater if it needed to. But it also had the jets on the side to propel it if needed as well.
Did it start at that side?
So I love the summertime water vehicles, and I'm always curious, did Hasbro have a thing like, hey, it's summertime, let's design some boats that kids can play with in their backyard pools or whatever, and vice versa, hey, it's wintertime, these are coming out on Christmas, let's develop some ice snow to it?
Yeah. We like to, first of all, we like a variety of kinds of vehicles. There are certain wheeled vehicles do sell better than other vehicles, but you have to have a variety because there's always the second and third vehicle that these kids are getting. Yeah, we thought about where they're going to play with it. The small boats, Devilfish and Piranha, sold incredibly well in terms of volume. We sold lots of those, lots and lots. And we thought that some of the big, we wanted to do, you know, much bigger boats, and we did, help me out, Cobra B.U.G.G. Thank you. So we did that one. It didn't sell as well as we had thought. It did okay. Didn't sell as well as we thought. We sort of did a post-mortem on it, and you can't take that into a bathtub. And how many people have pools? You can take it in your bathtub. Yes. Yeah, okay. It takes up a lot of room, anyway.
It did.
But yeah, it floated well. You know, it had a lot of play value, but it was harder to bring into the bathtub. I got a question for you. So I've talked to some people out there. And a bunch of you know it, but does anybody know what vehicle has first date with my now wife? Anyone? Anyone? Not you. Anyone? No? No? Okay, let's try that. Vehicle that might have my nephew's birth date on it. What you got?
So the Gladiator is the European version, and it's called the Monster. No, the Blocker.
Monster Blacker APC?
No.
Yeah.
No.
The Blockbuster. Blockbuster.
No! That was a good guess. But you did get the Gladiator part. Anybody know the Gladiator?
Galloway.
What?
Galloway?
Yeah, who said that? Come here.
You get a cookie.
Please raise your hand for my wife's and my first date. What was that?
It's on the Mamba. It's 225B, and B is for the last name.
Nice.
Very good.
What last one?
Congratulations.
Last one, easy one. Let's see who. I'm going to try to see hands. What does Locust stand for? I saw this guy right here first in the black. Yes?
Locust?
Yes.
The low cost. Low cost.
It's the last one. That's the hands. You're welcome. Any last questions? Yes, the project. Yell loud because you don't have the mic.
So in the Star Wars community recently, they found a way to kickstart through HasLab Java sail bar, something that the Star Wars community thought they would never see. If for any reason Hasbro wanted to go and to do a HasLab for Joe, is that something that's exciting for the world of toy designers to have a budget that's much greater and be able to do some of those details that maybe you couldn't have done when you were working on those things? Is that something that is a little more exciting, or how do you feel about that type of thing?
So the question, if you haven't heard, is HasLab did the sail barge for Star Wars Kickstarter. Really cool. And would we want to do that for a G.I. Joe thing? First of all, I'm not with Hasbro. Haven't been for a while, about 6 years now. I consult in design for a bunch of other little toy companies and part of some startups. Anyway, so I can't answer for them. Would I want to do it? Absolutely. And we do kick-ass stuff.
I got
a question.
Okay.
What was your first vehicle that you worked on and your last vehicle? And what was your most fun or challenging vehicle?
Wow.
3 questions.
Okay, 3 in 1. First vehicle I worked on, I think, was the LCV, low call vehicle. On the side it says NTZ, as in Kunitz, 516 underneath it, and that 516 was the address of the fraternity I was in at Purdue University. Last vehicle that I worked on, well, so some of the Sergeant Savage stuff. Probably the last one was that, what did I call it? Rock Crusher, yes. That was probably the last vehicle I worked on for the JoeCon. That tour duty. I then came back to Hasbro. I left, went to Tyco, went to Mattel, came back to Hasbro. I was head of Hasbro Direct. We did Toys R Us exclusives. We did exclusives for all sorts of stuff. And so there was some stuff I worked on, sort of. I was directing and VPing and stuff like that, so I didn't get to play as much. Favorite toy as a kid was probably Hot Wheels. That or Major Matt Mason's.
Oh, yeah.
I think I've run out of time. And thanks, and if you want to ask questions, I'll be around.